We first started thinking about writing a book in 2010, and we had just finished 10 years of practice, and we thought that was a good time to look back on the last 10 years. And so we started the book in 2010, and it just sat for many different versions, and we kept changing the way that we were going to think about it. We never had time to really work on it, so years went by. And all of a sudden we were approaching 15 years of practice. So we thought, well, now we really have to do it because we can't wait for 20. And so, what had kind of languished in our back of our minds for really 5 or 6 years, all of a sudden we really focused on and worked with a big team and started thinking through and kind of put it all together actually in a very short period. So it's kind of a nice combination of something that gestated for a very, very long time, combined with something that we actually put together with a lot of intensity and a lot of energy. So the book really looks at 15 years of practice. We didn't want it to just be a picture book or a book that was, only written for architects. We wanted it to be a book that really was about how architecture and life come together, and how architecture can impact life and life can impact architecture. And we also wanted it to be about our process, the way that we work. We wanted the book to be about our process. And so we work by talking with each other, and so the book is structured like a conversation between Amal and I. And it really looks at all different issues that we feel are important to practice today. And so it goes through issues, and then it zooms into projects and kind of goes back and forth. It also looks at the history of the office, and we wanted it to be about everything. So it's about almost going bankrupt, it's about having children, it's about thinking about climate change, so it really encompasses everything. For us, this idea of process is where the title comes from, that in a way, it's a play on the phrase, that we actually never liked, which is, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, which is like, let's put off this decision until later when we need it. And we're always about, like, let's think about all the things that could possibly happen, and let's look at things from different angles. So for us, we never like to say, just cross that bridge when we come to it. So we thought it's funny to invert it. And we also use a lot of inversions in our work. And so the idea is that, that architecture is a journey in a way, and that you're always looking at everything, and that in a way there's always a bridge to cross to get there. So that's kind of what it was.
Y'all know that on the block they slinging miracles. About 1.5 said I be gone for a sec, but I be coming right back. I got your service. I told my nigga D where it's at.
Another really significant project for us is our first project, which was a doghouse. And we used to always present the doghouse as a kind of funny project to start every lecture, because the doghouse, well, first of all, it was never really built, and it's just funny that we both worked at OMA and did huge projects all around the world, and basically when we started our office, we waited for the phone to ring, and the first commission was for a doghouse. But what makes it important for us is that it is a very small project with very little impact on the world, but we kind of took it seriously. We made a doghouse for the urban dog, where the dogs that are cooped up in their apartment all day long have the chance to kind of experience some of the life of a rural dog, so it can chase cars or the postman, or it can spend the day outdoors while it's inside through video screens and a treadmill and an odor machine. So it's also a funny project, and so it has humor, it has kind of urban thinking, and it is also a kind of interesting object. So for us, that was also important.
I believe what I'm seeing.
I think the doghouse is a very ironic thing. It's maybe more ironic because we later discovered that dogs don't see in color, so therefore the video screens maybe would not have worked. But they do walk on treadmills, we found out. But I think, that really uses this idea of, the pet and the fact that they're cooped up in the apartment all day long, and this idea that they could have this whole other experience in the city is something that's an ironic moment, that they're living a kind of rural life while they're actually sitting in a living room doing nothing. And I think, but at the same time, it's probably going to be really good for the dog. And I think it also, for us, is a way of thinking about the city that's totally different. I would love to, be walking through a city and think I'm in a forest or at a farm. And I think the combining of these things are going to make people think differently about how cities and environment can work together, which is a very important thing. Funny is kind of how we look at the world, and I wrote an article about architecture and humor where I tried to explain what we mean about funny. And I think that, first of all, for me, funny is not the opposite of serious. And I think that's what I was trying to say, is that there is serious art, like surrealism, which is funny. There's serious literature written by all kinds of people throughout the world, which are funny books. Comedians these days are producing very serious works. And so I think that this opposition between funny and serious is maybe the wrong way to think about humor. I think that humor is a tool which can be used, like in literature, to address very serious subjects and to kind of take people out of their day-to-day experience. And to kind of introduce something different into the way of thinking about a particular subject. It kind of loosens people up. Oftentimes, if someone is giving a serious speech, they'll still start with a joke, and I think it puts people in a frame of mind to think more creatively. And so for me, funny and humor is really about creativity, and it's about the unexpected. And so I think that architects take themselves very seriously, and they should. But they should also recognize that humor is an important tool and a very creative tool. And I think that architecture could benefit from people not thinking, not worrying about being so serious all the time. So it's both an opposite, but it's also, for me, intrinsically related, seriousness and funny. Irony, I think irony is a tough one, because irony is not something I talk about or think about very often. I think irony is often a negative word. But it was interesting, as part of the article I spoke with Sam Jacob, formerly of FAT. And Sam, said that in a way he embraces irony because if something is an ironic situation, it means that something that is one way can also be read as a different way. And that's very interesting in architecture, I think. The idea that something can be one thing to one person or one group or in one condition, and it can also be something else. And that, for me, is kind of interesting embrace of complexity and diversity, and a recognition that architecture needs to appeal to different people in different situations. Maybe the way it addresses the street is different than the way it is if someone lives inside the building. The inside can be different than the outside. And so I think if we think of irony as something that's embracing two sides that are not often combined together, that is an important part of architecture. I think if we say, architecture should be ironic, you think like we're playing a trick on people. And I don't think I want to play a trick on people. I want people to recognize a funny situation or a surreal situation. I want people to look at something and say like, oh, I never thought a building could be like that. I never thought you could have a garden connected to your shower. So when you take a shower, you're watering the plants. It's funny to take a shower and water the plants, but also the plants don't think it's that funny. They're very happy to have the water. So, but just the act of making people think about architecture and think about space and think about relationships between nature and cities to make unexpected connections, that's funny. And that's also serious.
Y'all know that on the block they slinging miracles. About 1.5 said I be gone.
We want to use humor, funny situations, the unexpected, the surreal, or the ironic in a way to make people think differently about architecture. And so in a way, it's very important that it be accessible to the broadest possible audience. And I think humor is also all about accessibility, because everyone can understand humor, not everyone can understand architecture. So for the edible schoolyard, which is an example, we really wanted to make it clear that the roofs are collecting rainwater. The rainwater goes into a cistern, and then the cistern allows us to take the rainwater, which in a city normally would have gone to the sewer and would have been a problem, instead of taking a rainwater that is sometimes a problem, to make it a solution and to reuse it for watering the plants in the garden. And we wanted that relationship between the sky, the rain, the roof, the cistern, and the garden to be very clear and very visible. And so the cistern is a circle, and there's a little window where you can see the cistern. The roofs are very clearly articulated, the cistern's at the middle, and then you can see how the water comes out and waters the plants. So I think all these things, we're not used to seeing these, the pipes on the outside of the building, like in Pompidou. And I think, by articulating it through color, through material, so the cistern is clad in rubber, so it looks like a toy. We really wanted to engage kids and make the kids think about it, and think about all the relationships between the city, the weather, this garden. And the whole project is like that. It's, this is used to be a parking lot. I think people pass this parking lot every day, never thought anything about it. Now it's a garden in the middle of the city, in a part of the city that didn't have very much green space at all, in a part of the city that doesn't have fresh vegetables all the time. And so all of a sudden, what was a parking lot is now a garden. I mean, that's a very surreal juxtaposition for people. And I think, but it's also very easy for them to understand, okay, we can take parking lots and we can turn them into gardens. Like and they should do it, everyone should do it. I think in art, you're much more used to irony or surrealism. And so I think it's more accepted in art. And I think that's interesting that our architects were on the edge. I think we consider ourselves just architects. We don't think we're artists, but these are the kind of projects that we really think about and love.
Yeah. Y'all know that on the
One of the issues which is very important to us is the issue of the environment, but kind of environments in general, and how the environment of a room or a space can help us understand the larger environment as well. And the project that illustrates that for us, which is not in the magazine or the film, is a project that we did in Gabon, which is in Central Africa. It's right on the equator. It's that country there. You have never heard of it. I had never heard of it. It's a very small country. It's a very wealthy country. It has oil and not many people. And it's also a fairly safe and fairly boring country. So the idea was the president wanted the African Union to meet in Gabon every 2 years and to launch Gabon as a kind of diplomatic center, as a kind of gateway to Africa, a kind of safe, democratic place to engage the continent. And he wanted to kind of wean the country off its oil dependency, and so be involved in tourism and things like that. So the building was supposed to reflect this country that nobody really knows about, and to kind of show the world through this meeting of the heads of state what can happen. Gabon is an amazing country. It's 90% unoccupied rainforest. It has amazing landscapes from mountains to jungles to beaches, amazing wildlife. It's home to almost all of the remaining forest elephants in the world. And the president's very committed to that. And most people, oh, I messed it up, sorry. Most people live in one city on the coast, which I'll show you here, which is Libreville. So most people live in this city here. And as you can see, even the city itself is combined with green space. It's a city that really has lots of parks and outdoor spaces, and kind of everyone is bunched up there, and the rest of the country is almost inaccessible. The country has a long history of engaging with modernism and modern architecture in a kind of different way than we got used to in the West. It's this kind of optimistic, happy architecture, first through tropical modernism type work that was going on in Ghana and in West Africa. And then later, through the non-aligned movement, Gabon was very involved with Yugoslavia in the non-aligned movement, and the Yugoslavian architects worked there as well. So it has a lot of very optimistic, very forward-looking, very contemporary-seeming buildings, which is maybe not how we think of Africa. And so that is one surprise. And then we discovered this guy, who is Italian. His name is Marcello Di Olivio, and he was an Italian architect. He worked with Bruno Zevi. He was friends with Paolo Soleri. And he, at one point, moved to Gabon, to Libreville, and did most of his built work there. He also worked in the Middle East a little bit. So he was the master planner of the city of Libreville, and he was a kind of organicist. So his take on modernism was this kind of more organic, curved shapes, lots of circular buildings. And so we wanted to kind of also channel his work in the country as well. So this is the project. The building is a circle. The main meeting space is in the middle. And then there are 3 gardens around the meeting space. It's on a hill, so you look up at the building. And instead of using like African patterns or something to reflect the country, we decided to use the landscape itself, this amazing landscape. And so the 3 gardens represent 3 different types of ecology that you would find in the country. And so looking up at the building, which is in this kind of diplomatic park, you see the 3 gardens, and then in the middle is where the rainwater collects. Gabon, like I said, it's very boring culturally. It's also very boring climatically. There's no wind, there's no earthquakes. The temperature is about 30 degrees during the day, and then at night it drops down to 30 degrees. The sun rises at 6 a.m. and sets at 6 p.m. every day. And there's no difference between a window facing north and a window facing south, because it's on the equator. So it's kind of uninteresting. What it does is rain. It rains like hell every day. So at some point during the day, it's going to rain, and right now that rain goes into the sewers and into the ocean. So this building is also about how to use rainwater in a different way. So the middle of the building is this kind of rainwater roof, which then drains and becomes a waterfall in the rainforest garden. And that kind of transparency extends to the water system throughout the landscape. And the building itself is very transparent. We wanted large openings, but it's very hot and sunny there, so we clad the entire building in stone. We worked with an Italian stone company who sourced it nearby in Central Africa to create these stone louvers that shade the building, allow for large openings. And we separated the stone louvers. This is a mock-up in Forti de Marmi. And we separated the stone louvers from the outside of the building so that we could create this promenade space that goes all the way around the building. And that's how you visit the gardens. And the idea was, after a day of meetings with presidents and kings, you would take your ally or your enemy and kind of continue the discussions as you walked around the building at the end of the day, kind of visiting the garden. So looking both out over the landscape and in towards the gardens of the project. And then the gardens are also kind of cut out of this space. This is the rainforest garden with the waterfall. And, it was a great project because it was about designing landscape, which we're really interested in, and, creating naturalistic landscapes, but also functional landscapes. So as the water comes down the waterfall, it's collected in a cistern, and then it's used as the toilet water and irrigation water for the entire building. And so we even got to design the waterfall. So this is a mock-up of the waterfall that we built to make the most beautiful waterfall. And so here's the plan of the building, very simple, the space in the middle, and then outside all of the circulation around it. And the gardens themselves become the kind of element that is special. And you see sometimes even on top of auditoriums, creating this kind of roof of the auditorium. The second thing I want to talk about is this idea of preservation and the past, which is an important thing in our work. We showed you the Diane von Furstenberg building. This is a museum we did at the University of Houston, also kind of combining old and new. We did a master plan for this amazing triangular island in the middle of St. Petersburg in Russia, which is a new cultural center. And, you know, in all these projects, we're always kind of researching and thinking about the relationship between the past and the present. We were invited to the Chicago Biennale last year and decided to use this idea of a residential project that we were looking into in Beirut as the kind of location to think through some of these issues at a greater level, and also to research Art Deco. So Art Deco is not something that we really think of a lot, but it had a major impact on Beirut. There was a very short period of time where the city was developing at the turn of the century, and the Art Deco style became this kind of means of expression for the country. And so we did a massive research project into the development of Art Deco. This is a drawing, for example, that shows the history of the development of Beirut from the past, where people lived in villas in the mountains, to the present at the bottom. So time kind of moves vertically in the drawing to the kind of present-day skyscrapers, which are kind of like everywhere else. And what's amazing about the Art Deco is that it's both modern and old in a way. It involves craft. Local craftsmen developed kind of Orientalist diagrams and details that were kind of hand-carved on site. And the building kind of referred to classical proportions, but had a mix of influences, kind of like the country itself, with all these different religions and cultures all living together in this tiny, very tense city in the Middle East. And so the Art Deco really becomes something very specific and very local, even though was the first kind of international style. It's something very local in Beirut. And then what we discovered is that it was also, as you see here in this diagram, it was all made possible through the invention of modern concrete. And so behind these very ornate, very detailed facades is essentially the Corbusian domino stacked concrete building. And so the buildings are this kind of combination of a very modernist stacking of concrete with stair tower with this kind of ornate facade. And so in this project, we were restoring the front of the house. The back had been bombed out and was missing. And so we developed a kind of version, a kind of contemporary Art Deco proposal for the rear. And then, through drawings, and we talked about models in the movie, but we also work through drawings, and through drawings try to understand issues from everything from programmatic issues to details. And so these are some of the drawings that we did of this project, and you see it kind of transforms through these decorative elements from the old facade to the new facade. And this, we also cut a kind of hole through the middle of the building, which kind of connects the two halves. We also wanted to show how these buildings really intersected with the very special environment of the Mediterranean and the Middle East, and how the balconies, for example, both shade the inside and also create this kind of almost public, almost private space that mediates between inside and outside. And so we wanted to kind of give this sense, this very kind of sensual aspect that the city has. And so we made an enormous model, and we worked with a photographer to photograph the model to try to give the sense of what would happen in these spaces as day turns to night, as the sun comes up, as the food is cooked. And so he made this series. So this is a model photograph that we made where we projected the image of the city in the back. That chair is just cut out of paper. It's two-dimensional, but it looks three-dimensional. To try to give the sense of what this... So this is the kind of old part of the inside, and then as you move through, this is the new part at the back. And try to give this kind of very romantic sense that city has.
Yeah. Y'all know that on the...
Last chapter I want to talk about is this idea of envelope. So I showed you in that Gabon project how, and even in the Art Deco project, we're always thinking about thickening the envelope. Also in Miami in the parking garage, that the envelope can be more than just the glass facade that separates inside and outside, but it can be a kind of space that really acts as public space or indoor-outdoor space that really kind of it's a third space between the private inside of a building and the public outside. And I think this is exemplified maybe here. I wanted to also show another research project. This is a collaboration with these guys. This is Ant Farm, which was an art and architecture collaborative of the 1970s in the US, kind of the US answer to Archigram. And these guys just built stuff. They invented all kinds of inflatable structures. And so I've always loved their work, and we decided to together make a proposal for another Chicago Biennale. Based on this idea of climate change and a kind of thickened envelope. So we started by looking at their projects. So this is one of their projects from the 70s. This is called the Dolphin Embassy. And the idea was that it was an embassy for dolphins. Hence the name. So the idea was that it was a kind of floating research ship that the dolphins could even drive the ship at times. So there are these tubes where the dolphins can swim up and drive the ship using dolphin brains. Dolphins were very popular in the 1970s, apparently. And so, but they had only done that one drawing of the project. So we took that drawing and redrew the plan and the section and gave it a scale. They had never done any architectural drawing. So we kind of thought through their work and their process by redrawing their project. So this is the section which never existed of the Dolphin Embassy. And then use that as inspiration for our project, which we call 3C City, that we designed together. 3C means climate, convention, and cruise. So the idea is a floating cruise ship for 5,000 people that would float from city to city, powered by wind, that would have this kind of thickened facade that sponsored a kind of convention center in the inside where experts would come and talk about climate change and try to convince Republicans that climate change was real, etc. And it was also a place for discussion, also interspecies discussion. We had to get the dolphins in there. Dolphins and whales also participate. So it's this kind of floating ship with kind of this big park space in the middle and this kind of thickened facade of experimental ways of collaborative living. So the idea was also when you're on this cruise, you're also living in a kind of new way. It's a kind of like a new commune. So this is shows the inside. Basically, you have private spaces here in red, and then kind of all different ways of interacting, communal cooking, places for small lectures, yoga, outdoor spaces, kind of all combined by kind of densifying the relationship between public and private and inside and outside. All right, that's it. Thank you. That was a joke. But, okay.